She had chosen the plainest gown in the room on purpose, and she had chosen the most public room in England on purpose, and when the line of presentation brought her at last to within 6 feet of her own husband, Eleanor, Duchess of Hartwell, sank into a curtsy so precise, so perfectly schooled, that 3 duchesses and a Russian ambassadress turned to see who had done it. It was the Queen's drawing room at St. James's, in the spring of 1817, and the air was thick with wax candles and hothouse lilies, and the particular silence of 400 people pretending not to watch one another. The Duke of Hartwell stood near the head of the room, with the Dowager Countess of Marbury at his elbow and the Countess's granddaughter Lady Caroline, arranged becomingly at his other side, and the whole assembly had spent the evening quietly understanding that an announcement would soon be made, that the most eligible duke in 3 kingdoms had at last been brought to the point by the cleverest old woman in London, and that the girl in the silver gauze would be a duchess by Michaelmas. Then the quiet woman in grey came up the line, and the Duke of Hartwell looked at her, and looked through her, and turned his face away as though she were a draught from an open window. He did it well. That was the thing Eleanor would remember, that her husband, who had once held her hand through a fever and called her the only honest thing in England, had a talent for it. His eyes passed over her face the way they would pass over a footman's, and he murmured something to Lady Caroline, and he did not see her, with the deliberate, practiced blindness of a man protecting an arrangement he could not afford to have interrupted by his own wife. So Eleanor straightened from the curtsy, and she lifted her chin, and she spoke, not loudly, but clearly, in the trained carrying voice of a captain's daughter who had learnt to be heard across a quarter-deck of wind, clearly enough that the Queen's chamberlain heard it, and the Marbury party heard it, and the 400 people pretending not to watch heard every syllable. "Your Grace," she said, "perhaps I may spare you the trouble of placing me. I am Eleanor, Duchess of Hartwell, your wife. We were married 14 months ago, by licence, before God and witnesses, in the parish church of Nethercombe." She let the smallest pause fall, like a coin onto marble. "I did not wish you to be embarrassed by failing to know me." The silence that followed did not fall. It spread. It went out from the spot where she stood the way a crack goes out across a frozen pond, family by family. Fan by fan, the whisper outrunning itself to the farthest corners of the room. The Duke of Hartwell has a wife, until even the musicians faltered, and the Dowager Countess of Marbury, who had not been surprised by anything in 40 years, went the colour of old paper. The court would talk of that silence for a generation, but the court did not yet know the half of what it was watching, and to understand what happened next, you must understand how a duke came to deny his own wife in front of his queen. He had not always been a coward. Eleanor held to that, even on the carriage ride home through the wet London dark, because she had seen the other man, and a woman does not marry a memory. 14 months before, the Duke of Hartwell had overturned his curricle on the Exeter Road in a December sleet, 2 miles from the village of Nethercombe, and a great many more from anyone who knew his name. They had carried him, insensible and bleeding from a wound above the temple, to the nearest respectable door, which was the small house where Eleanor Marsh kept a frugal establishment for herself, and her widowed aunt on the half-pay pension of her dead father, Captain Marsh of the Naiad, lost with most of his crew off Finisterre when Eleanor was 19, and remembered in those parts as the man who had put 30 of his people into the boats before he would leave the deck. Eleanor had nursed strangers before. The village had no surgeon worth the name, and a captain's daughter learns the management of wounds and fevers the way other girls learn the harp. She did not know the man in her aunt's spare bed was a duke. He was, for 11 days, only a fever and a wound and a low voice that said wild things in the night and clear surprising things by day. And the Duke of Hartwell, who had spent his whole life being managed by people who wanted his rank, lay in a borrowed bed and watched a woman he had no claim on tend him for nothing, expecting nothing, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen since his father's death begin, against all sense to thaw. "You do not flatter me," he had said on the 9th day, when the fever had broken and he could sit up. 11 days, and you have not once told me I am brave, or handsome, or sure to recover. My valet tells me so before breakfast." "You are not brave," Eleanor had said, wringing out the cloth. "You wept in the night for someone named Harry, and you were frightened of the dark like any other man with a hole in his head. You are recovering because you have the constitution of a cart horse, and because I am good at my work, neither of which is to your credit." She had laid the cool cloth against his temple with steady fingers, and she had not simpered, and he had looked at her hands, brown at the wrists, capable, unadorned, and the Duke of Hartwell had thought, with the clarity that comes once or twice in a life, "I have met 1,000 women who wanted to be a duchess. I have just met the first one I would make one. Harry was my brother," he had said. After a silence which surprised them both, he had told no one in London that name in 6 years. "He died at Badajoz. I was meant to buy his colours back and bring him home, and I was too slow about it. And he died, and my father never said a word of blame, which was worse than if he had shouted the house down." He had looked at the ceiling. "I do not know why I have told you that. Because I am a stranger," Eleanor had said gently, "and strangers are safe. You will be sorry tomorrow that you said it, and you will be stiff with me, and I shall let you, and in a day or 2 you will forget to be." She had set down the cloth. "That is how it goes with grief and strangers. I nursed a great many men after Finisterre who had things they could only say to someone who had not known the dead." And the Duke had looked at the plain, steady woman at his bedside, and felt, for the first time since Badajoz, that he had been understood rather than managed, and it had frightened him more than the fever. He had married her 3 weeks later, when he could stand, by license, in the little flint church at Nethercombe, with her aunt and the verger and the verger's wife to witness it. And he had meant every word of it, and on the morning he left for London to set his affairs in order before bringing her home in state, he had pressed into her hands a square of plain linen she had hemmed for him during his recovery. She had embroidered one small corner of it, his initial and hers entwined, the only frivolous thing she owned, and he had said, "Keep this. No, give it me. I will carry it until I can carry you through my own front door, and then you may have it back, and laugh at my stitching of a sentiment." He had put it in his breast pocket. He had ridden away with her needlework over his heart. That was the man Eleanor had married. The man at the palace was what London had made of him in 14 months, and London, as the narrator must report, is a forge that has unmade better men than the Duke of Hartwell. What London had made of him had a name, and the name was Marbury. The late Duke, James's father, had died leaving the dukedom land rich and ruinously short of ready money, and the bulk of the secret debt, the kind a great family does not heir, had been quietly bought up, over the dying man's last years, by the late Earl of Marbury, and had passed at his death to his widow. The Dowager Countess of Marbury thus held, in a strong-box in Berkeley Square, paper enough to call the Duke of Hartwell to ruin in a single morning. And she held something subtler besides. She sat at the centre of the web of favour and appointment that a young duke needed, if he were to be anything in the Lords but a name, and she had made it gently, repeatedly, unmistakably clear, that all of it, the forgiveness of the debt, the smoothing of his path, the great career, flowed through the marriage of her granddaughter Caroline. The Countess had not been troubled, particularly, to learn the Duke had got himself a wife in some Devon backwater. Such things, in her long experience, could be managed. A clandestine country marriage to a portionless nobody was a thing that came undone with money and discretion, and the right word in the right ecclesiastical ear. She had undone too in her time. She had written to Eleanor herself, a cool and not unkind letter, offering a generous sum and a quiet life abroad in exchange for the girl's understanding that the marriage had been a mistake which a sensible woman would allow to be forgotten. And when that was declined, she had simply gone on arranging the world as if Eleanor did not exist, confident that the Duke, who needed her so badly, would in the end do as men in his position always did, which was to choose the great career over the inconvenient heart. She had very nearly been right. The Duke had not consented to deny his wife. He had told himself, through the long London winter, that he was only delaying, only securing the ground, only waiting for the moment when he could acknowledge Eleanor without bringing the whole edifice down on both their heads. But a man who delays a true thing long enough becomes, by slow degrees, a man who is hiding it, and standing at the head of the Queen's drawing-room with Marbury's hand on his sleeve and Marbury's debt over his head, he had looked at his own wife, and lost his nerve, and looked away. The detonation, then, the thing the whispering court could not yet see, was this. Eleanor had not come to that palace as a wronged woman throwing herself on the mercy of the room. She had come as the only person present who held proof of all of it. She had the certified register of a lawful marriage no ecclesiastical court in England could set aside. And she had, folded in her reticule, the Dowager Countess of Marbury's own letter, the cool, generous, perfectly incriminating letter offering a duke's wife money to disappear. She had not curtsied to beg. She had curtsied to begin. He came to her the next morning, which surprised her. She had thought he might let the solicitors come instead. She received him in the small rented parlour off Wigmore Street, where she had taken modest rooms under her own name, and he stood turning his hat in his hands like a boy. And the great Duke of Hartwell looked, in the grey morning light, simply tired and ashamed. "Eleanor," he said. "What I did last night was very well done," she said. "I have rarely seen a thing done so completely. You did not even blink." She did not offer him a chair. "Have you come to apologize? Because I will tell you now, Your Grace, you may save your apologies for a woman who came to London to be soothed. I am not she. I did not curtsy to the whole of the court to be told that you are sorry, and that it is all very difficult, and that you never meant it." Her voice did not rise. It sharpened, which was worse. "I have had your sorrow in letters for 6 months. I came for an answer to one question, and you will give it me, and then I will know at last which man I married. Are you my husband in the daylight, or only in the dark where it costs you nothing?" The hat went still in his hands. "You do not understand what she holds over me," he said low. "Marbury, if I acknowledge you tomorrow, she calls the debt the same afternoon, and it is not only my ruin, it is the tenants, the livings, my mother's jointure, 300 people who—" "I understand it perfectly," Eleanor said. "I understood it before you did. I have read her letter, which is more than you have. Do not tell me about the people who depend on you, James, as though I were not one of them." That landed. She saw it land. You are not a coward because you are afraid of ruin. Every sensible man is afraid of ruin. You are a coward because you decided, somewhere in this city, that my dignity was the cheapest thing you owned, and the first you would spend. She crossed to the window so that he would not see her face do the thing it wanted to do. I nursed a man for 11 days who wept in the dark and was not ashamed for me to see it. I should like to know where he has gone. Because the man who looked through me last night is a stranger, and I find I do not much care to be married to a stranger, debt or no debt. For a long moment the only sound was the rain. Then she heard him cross the room and stop, not near her. The width of the small parlour held between them like a held breath, and she heard him take something from his breast pocket. It was the handkerchief, the plain square of linen with her own small foolish stitching in the corner, soft now with 14 months of carrying, and he held it in his 2 hands as though it were the last solid thing in a falling house. "I never stopped carrying it," he said. "Not last night. Not once." I denied you to 400 people with your needlework over my heart, and if you want to know where that other man has gone, Eleanor, he has been here the whole time carrying this, hating himself, and too great a coward to take it out." He looked up. "That is not an apology. You are right. You have had enough of those. It is only the truth, which I have been spending so freely on everyone else that I had none left for you. I do not know yet if I am brave enough to be your husband in the daylight. But I know I have been wretched as a stranger, and I am done with it. It was not a vow. It was too honest to be a vow." But Eleanor looked at her own crooked stitching in her husband's shaking hands, and she came one step nearer across the parlour, and did not take the handkerchief, and did not send him away. And the rain came down on Wigmore Street, and something that had been frozen between them since the palace cracked, just at the edge, like the first give of a thaw. He courted her after that, which was a strange thing for a man to do to his own wife of 14 months, and stranger still that she let him. He came to Wigmore Street each afternoon that week, and he did not bring the things a duke brings. No hothouse flowers, no jeweller's boxes, nothing Marbury's world would have recognized as courtship. He brought, the second day, a book of charts of the Channel coast, because she had spoken once of her father's profession, and he had remembered. And the third day he brought nothing at all but himself, and an afternoon he might have spent shoring up his crumbling consequence, and spent instead on a sofa in a rented parlour, talking to her the way he had talked in the borrowed bed at Nether Combe, before either of them had anything to lose. "I used to be able to do this," he said one evening, when the lamps had been lit and neither of them had rung for them to be taken away, which was its own kind of confession. "Sit near you, and not measure every word. I have forgotten the trick of it. London teaches a man to weigh everything, and I have grown so accomplished at the weighing that I weighed you, Eleanor, God forgive me, and found you inconvenient." He was sitting nearer than the conversation required. She had not moved away. "I am trying to unlearn it. I find it is like unlearning a language. The old words keep coming first. Then say the wrong ones," she said, "and let me hear the right ones come after." He turned toward her, and she did not turn away, and there was a moment then, the lamplight low, the rain gone to a hush at the window, his hand moving toward hers across the small distance that was all that remained of 14 months, and a palace, and a denial. A moment when one honest inch would have closed the whole of it. The knock at the parlour door broke it like a dropped glass. Her landlady, with a letter come express, bearing the Marbury seal, the first cold breath of what the Countess meant to do to a duke who had been seen courting his own wife. The moment was gone, and the war was not over, and they both knew it. But Eleanor had seen his hand reach, and seen it falter only at the interruption and not at her, and she carried that with her into everything that came after. It was the old Dowager Lady Brandon who gave Eleanor the standing the court had tried to deny her, and she did it for the soundest of reasons, which was that she had loved Eleanor's mother 40 years before, and despised the Dowager Countess of Marbury for 30. Lady Brandon had been at the drawing-room. Lady Brandon had heard the captain's daughter name herself, and had clapped her old hands together once in pure delight, and had gone home and begun, with the relentless energy of a grande dame who has been bored for a decade, to remind London who Eleanor Marsh actually was. Not the fortune-hunting nobody Marbury's whisperers were busily describing, but the daughter of the Captain Marsh, the Finisterre Marsh, whom half the navy still drank to, and of a mother gently born and gently remembered. She took Eleanor up. She drove her in the park at the fashionable hour. She seated her at her own dinner table above women who had cut her, and dared them, with one lifted eyebrow, to say a word. And it was at Lady Brandon's, 3 evenings after the palace, that the Duke of Hartwell made his choice, not in private, where it would have cost him nothing, but at a crowded supper with 30 witnesses, and Marbury's own creatures among them. He crossed the drawing-room to where his wife sat among her champions, and he bowed to her, fully, and he offered her his arm before the assembled company, and he said, clearly, "Your Grace, they tell me my wife is the handsomest woman in London this season, and I have been too great a fool to be seen beside her. Will you correct my error?" And Eleanor rose and took his arm, and the room saw the Duke of Hartwell choose the captain's daughter in the daylight, with Marbury's spies watching, knowing precisely what the choice would cost. It cost him by noon the next day. The Dowager Countess of Marbury did not make idle threats. She had never needed to. The debt was called, the whole of it, in a single brutal letter from her solicitors, payable within the month. And with it came the quiet, devastating word through every channel she owned that the appointment was withdrawn. The doors were closing, and the Duke of Hartwell, who had married beneath himself and insulted the House of Marbury, would find London a colder place than he remembered. She meant to ruin him utterly, and to make Eleanor watch her husband fall and know that her own stubborn dignity had pushed him. That was the move that nearly succeeded. Eleanor found him in his study at Hartwell House the evening the demand came, gone grey and still among the unpayable papers, and for the first time she saw what it truly was she had asked him to face. Not embarrassment, but the genuine grinding end of everything his name had been. "I will sell what is not entailed," he said dully. "It will not be enough. She has timed it so it cannot be enough." He looked at her, and there was no reproach in it, which made it harder to bear. "I do not regret choosing you. I want you to know that, whatever comes, I would rather be ruined as your husband than great as her granddaughters. I only wish I had been brave a year sooner, when I might have been brave and solvent both." And Eleanor, Duchess of Hartwell, captain's daughter, who had been waiting through all of it to be quite certain of the man before she spent the last of her powder, sat down across from him and opened her reticule. "You have been fighting her," Eleanor said, as though she held all the cards, "because you have only ever seen the cards she chose to show you. Husband, look at mine." She laid them on the desk one at a time, the way Marbury herself laid down a winning hand. First, the certified copy of the parish register of Nethercombe, the lawful marriage, by license, before named witnesses. In a consecrated church, 14 months passed. "There is no clandestine marriage here for any court to set aside," she said. "She has been telling you for a year that I could be made to disappear. I never could. She knew it. She gambled that you would not find the nerve to make her prove it." Second, she laid down the Countess's own letter to her, the cool, generous, ruinous letter, in the unmistakable hand the whole of London knew, offering the Duke of Hartwell's lawful wife a sum of money and a life abroad to pretend her marriage had never happened. She put it in writing, Eleanor said softly. 40 years at the centre of everything, and she grew so sure of herself she put it in her own hand. "This is not a letter to a fortune hunter, James. This is the Dowager Countess of Marbury conspiring to procure a bigamous marriage between her granddaughter and a man she knew to be lawfully wed, to pass Lady Caroline off as a duchess, while a true duchess lived. There is not a drawing-room in England that would survive the reading of it. There is scarcely a court that would." The Duke looked at the letter for a long time. "If this were known," he said slowly, "she could not call the debt. She could not say one word against you. She would have to do precisely as I tell her," Eleanor said, "or be destroyed." "Yes," she folded her hands. "I have had this for 6 months, James. I could have used it the day she sent it. I did not. Because I did not yet know whether I was protecting a husband or merely a man who shared my name. And one does not spend a weapon like this to save a stranger. You took the handkerchief out of your pocket. You crossed Lady Brandon's drawing-room in front of her spies. You chose ruin over her, openly, before you knew I held anything at all." She allowed herself, at last, the smallest smile. "So now you may have my cards." because now I am quite sure of the man I married. The court that had watched the Duke of Hartwell deny his wife was given. 10 days later, the spectacle of its undoing, and it never forgot the second scene any more than the first. It happened at the Marbury Ball, for the Dowager Countess, supremely confident, had thrown open Berkeley Square for the season's great crush, meaning it to be the stage on which all of London watched the upstart Duchess and her ruined Duke fail to appear, and grasped that the House of Marbury had won. They appeared. Eleanor came up the great staircase on her husband's arm in deep sapphire, no longer the quiet grey ghost of the palace, with old Lady Brandon sailing ahead of her like a flagship clearing the way, and the Duke of Hartwell at her side claiming her with every step, and the crush parted before them, whispering, all the way to the Countess herself. What passed between Eleanor and the Dowager Countess of Marbury passed quietly, in a window embrasure, in the space of 3 minutes, while the music played and the candles burned, and 400 people pretended not to watch for the second time in a fortnight. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She named, in order, what she held, the register, the letter, the precise words the letter contained. She named what would happen to the House of Marbury, to Lady Caroline, who would be known forever as the girl her grandmother had tried to make a duke's bigamous bride, if one penny of the debt were called, if one whisper more were breathed against the Duchess of Hartwell, if the Countess did not, that very night, forgive the debt in full and witnessed writing as a wedding gift to a couple she was henceforth delighted to have helped to the altar. You will smile, Eleanor told her, and you will be gracious, and you will spend the rest of your life being known as the Duchess of Hartwell's dearest friend, which will cost you more than the money ever could, and we both know it. Or you will be the woman who tried to sell her granddaughter into bigamy, in your own hand, for the world to read. Choose, my lady. You taught me how. One does not spend a winning card until the table is full. She dropped a curtsy then, the same flawless, devastating curtsy she had made at the palace, the one the whole court had seen. Only now its meaning was turned entirely around. I learnt that one watching you. The Dowager Countess of Marbury looked into the steady eyes of the captain's daughter she had so badly underestimated, and understood that she had, for the first time in 40 years, lost, and being, whatever else, a great player of the game, she did the only thing left to her. She smiled. She took Eleanor's hands in hers before the whole assembly, and she said, in a carrying voice of warm and wholly false delight, my dear Duchess, how wonderful that you could come. The debt was forgiven in writing before the supper was served, witnessed by Lady Brandon, who read it twice for the pleasure of it, and pronounced the hand very fine. Word of the reconciliation went round the rooms within the hour, in the particular hush that travels faster than any announcement, and the same 400 who had watched a duke deny his wife now watched the House of Marbury welcome her, and drew the only conclusion a watching court ever draws, which is to admire whoever is left standing. And the Duke of Hartwell, standing in the Marbury ballroom with his ruin lifted from his shoulders by his own wife's hand, drew from his breast pocket a worn square of plain linen, and looked at the crooked stitching in the corner, and then at Eleanor, and what broke open in his face was not relief, but something far larger. The thing a man feels when he understands at last exactly what he so nearly threw away. He did not make a speech. He only lifted her hand and pressed it, and said low, for her alone, I love what breathes under the silk. Eleanor, I always did. I am only sorry it took me a palace and a near ruin to be worth saying it. And in front of the watching court he kissed her, once, and the kiss said the thing that 14 months and 400 witnesses had not let them say, which was that this was a marriage chosen twice, in the dark and now in the daylight, and would not be unmade. By the following spring the Duke and Duchess of Hartwell had gone down to the country, to the great house Eleanor had still never seen on the morning her husband rode away, promising to carry her through its door, and he carried her through it at last, 14 months late, and laughed at his own old stitching of a sentiment, and gave her back the handkerchief to keep. She kept it in the small drawer of her writing desk, where the most important things go, beside the certified register and the Countess's letter, which she never had to use again, for the Dowager Countess of Marbury was as good as her false word, and went to her grave some years later, universally believed to have been the architect of the Hartwells' famous love match, a reputation that galled her. Friends said to the very end, which Eleanor counted a fairer punishment than any court could have devised. Lady Caroline, freed of a grandmother's ambition, married a kind and unremarkable baronet she had loved for 2 years, and was glad of it, and sent the Hartwells a christening gift the winter their son was born. Old Lady Brandon came down every summer, until she died, to sit on the terrace and tell the boy stories about his grandfather the captain who had put 30 men in the boats before he left the deck, and about his mother, who had walked into the most dangerous room in England in the plainest gown she owned, and curtsied to a husband who would not know her, and made the whole court go silent, and walked out a duchess in fact as well as name. She told it to me herself, once, Lady Brandon would say, what she was thinking, in that long silence at the palace, when he had looked clean through her and the whole room held its breath. And the boy would always ask what it was, and the old woman would always smile. She was thinking, Lady Brandon said, that a man may forget his wife if she lets him, but a woman who knows her own worth need only stand up straight and say her name and speak it loud enough for a king to hear. And then the forgetting is over. For everyone. Out beyond the terrace the long green country ran down to the river, and the wind moved through it, keeping, as the wind does, the only true memory of how it had all happened, the plain grey gown, the perfect curtsy, and the clear unhurried voice of a woman who had simply refused, in a room full of people paid to look away, to be unseen,